Hello and welcome. I'm Maria Ressa. It is a historic day in the Philippines. The Senate, sitting as an impeachment court, has just concluded a 44-day trial and just voted to impeach the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Renato Corona. Sitting with us is DLSU, the Dean of its law school of De La Salle University, Jose Manuel Diokno. Chel, thank you so much for coming here. The vote, 20-3, it's a large vote.
It's overwhelming, yeah.
So how would you assess the way this whole process has gone?
Well, I think that you look at the process, the trial on two levels. You look at it from the point of view of the legal perspective and the political. On the legal side, I think, despite the difficulties they faced, the prosecution somehow was able to prove a case. And they may have to thank the defense for that, because in many ways the prosecution was able to prove their case through the evidence of the defense.
It was actually the defense that introduced the evidence that was used against them. How could the defense make such a large blunder?
Well, of course, it's easy to make these post-mortems, but there were probably a number of tactical mistakes made by the defense. One of them, and probably the most crucial, was in calling the Ombudsman, Morales, to testify.
Yes.
That to me was the real turning point in the trial. Second, of course, is the decision of the Chief Justice himself to take the stand. May have been a totally different story if Ombudsman Morales hadn't testified and Chief Justice had gone on the stand immediately.
Yes.
Who knows? Both might have been different.
This decision, does this mean now that the Ombudsman can continue doing what she did? I mean, this is a new way of going after public officials and keeping them accountable.
It's very interesting because now there are tools that have been sleeping on the part of the Ombudsman that she's flexing and using. One of them is the waiver that every government official has to sign in the Salen. That's a very powerful tool.
What about the Chief Justice? Now the former Chief Justice, it's immediately executory.
Yeah,
right?
there's no motion for reconsideration, there's no appeal.
So what happens next in terms of the justice system?
Well, of course, the president would have to deal with the vacancy in the court. He would have to appoint and justice and designate the Chief Justice.
In the interim period, the most senior justice takes over
as
acting.
Temporarily.
So
there are, I think, more far-reaching ramifications of this whole thing. One of them is the whole issue of transparency, access to the salons. Is the Supreme Court going to keep its 23-year-old rule of restricting access? I think the court should change that. That should be hopefully one of the immediate results of this trial.
Again, it seemed like while we were watching the trial, some things just seemed wrong. The prosecution actually said that it would set the wrong precedents if the Chief Justice, if Renato Corona's interpretation of the FCDA taking precedence over the Constitution were to have been upheld. I mean, that seems an absurd argument now, given this, but how could learned men of the law have made such an argument?
I think that really was the weak link. When the Chief Justice claimed that he had no obligation, in fact that he could hide it because of the foreign currency law, that's really what we call among lawyers a mistake of fact. A mistake of law.
Right.
And there's a big difference between a mistake of fact and a mistake of law. As a Chief Justice, we all know this, ignorance of the law is no excuse. So if you make a mistake in interpreting the law, that's your own lookout. It's different when you make a mistake of fact. For instance, you think that somebody's entering your house, that it's a burglar, and because of that you defend yourself and you end up injuring that person. Then that is a defense.
Yes.
But a mistake in your understanding of the law, especially in the trial, an impeachment trial involving the Chief Justice, that's a big blunder.
What's next for Renato Corona? I mean, he admitted that he has $2.4 million. Senator Lacson claimed it's more, and that he has 80 million pesos that he didn't declare. What's next for him?
The ball is with the Ombudsman. And under the Constitution, impeachment is only for removal.
Yes.
So now the question is whether there will be any criminal prosecutions against the Chief Justice. And that is really within the jurisdiction of Ombudswoman Morales.
You've long talked about the problems that the justice system has. How do you think this will filter down through the justice system? I mean, you talked about greater transparency, yes, but what things now could this be?
No, first of all, the transparency, not just the Supreme Court, but all of the justices and the judges in terms of declaring their assets and liabilities. Because the Supreme Court has been very secretive about their salience, the other lower courts have followed suit. So it's not just them, but everyone in the justice and the judiciary who must be more transparent, especially because, and I've said this before, they're the least accountable in the sense that they're not elected. They're appointed, therefore they must show the people that they're doing their job and that they're not gathering or getting any hidden wealth in the process.
I want to zoom back into the trial since we're seeing pictures of them milling around at the Senate. The highs and low points of this whole process, it's been 44 days. Could you, in your mind, what do you consider the high points? What do you consider the low points?
Well, I think the highest point in the trial was when Ombudswoman Morales testified. The lowest point, well, hard to say because there were a lot of low points. This whole thing could have probably been shortened into half the time had there been really a meaningful pre-trial or some meaningful conference before the start of the trial where the Senate President would have said, come on, get your act together, let's decide on all the witnesses, let's decide on all the exhibits, and let's make this happen in 20 or 25 days.
It also seemed, though, that the Senate wasn't prepared for that either.
It's
mean,
difficult.
We saw the rules changing.
Half of the senators are not lawyers at all.
Yes.
Of those who are lawyers, only one had prior experience as a judge. And of all of them, I don't think she was, well, perhaps we can say she was the most judicious
yes.
of all of them in her conduct. So maybe our expectations were too high for the Senate. And because the Constitution vests that power in them, you really cannot escape the fact that it's going to be political.
What did you make of the speeches justifying their votes today that the senators gave? What were the high points there for you?
Well, I wasn't really that interested, frankly, in the speeches because they just reflect how they want to be recorded in history insofar as this impeachment is concerned. I'm sure the dynamics of how they voted, their internal decision-making was much more complex than what they said.
Yes. It was interesting because going up until the Ombudsman's testimony and Corona himself, it seemed like there weren't enough votes to convict. And then in the last week or so, it changed dramatically. Did you get that same impression?
It happened as well in the impeachment trial of Estrada. Mm-hmm. And very often it happens because of things or events that come up that were not expected by any of the parties. And even in trials in court, that does occur. As litigators, we just have to roll with the punches and live with whatever situation is there.
You led a team during the Estrada impeachment trial. How has the Philippines progressed in terms of trials like this now?
Oh, hard to say. Impeachment trials really are just once in a blue moon. And I really hope that it doesn't happen, that they become a regular feature
Correct.
in the legal landscape. But because they happen so rarely, sometimes maybe there's a tendency for the lawyers to make the same mistakes. And a lot of it really has to do with the experiences of the lawyers in handling not just impeachment trials, but handling all kinds of cases in all kinds of courts. Unfortunately, in this one, the public prosecutors particularly were not well versed in trial work.
Yes.
And at least in the beginning, the private prosecutors didn't do that good a job as well.
Yes. The Supreme Court, one of the lead defense counsel, Serafin Cuevas, has actually said that it's an option to take the decision to the Supreme Court.
I disagree. I disagree. It's very clear under the Constitution. There's no motion for reconsideration. There's no appeal. That's really what it means when they say that the Senate impeachment court, when it comes to impeachment, is really the highest court as far as.
So this is it.
goes.
This sets the standard as
Yes.
well. And I guess in the immediate, short, in the medium term, and then the long term, what would you like to see come out of this? Aside, you mentioned transparency.
Yes, transparency, and I think I'm very happy that it's not just the Salan, but I'm very happy that the focus has really been on the judicial system. It's about time that the people, not just the government, but all of us pay attention to what's happening in the criminal justice system. If we don't do anything, then all other talk of development is useless. You won't be
Yes.
able to attract any kind of investments. You won't be able to resolve business problems and all that if your courts don't work well.
Yes.
So it's so crucial that we address not just transparency, but number one, number two, delay. Delays in the court are such a big problem. Number three, which related to the delay is the big number of vacancies. We
Yes.
all have like 27% of our trial courts have no judges.
Yes.
Now, until we can fix those problems, we'll never have a good legal system. And if we don't have a good legal system, we won't be able to help the people and develop the country.
You know, we've seen the Supreme Court employees rallying and supporting Corona. How do you think that third branch of government will absorb this decision?
Well, one thing I didn't like during this whole impeachment trial was what I felt was the use of the institution and the employees of the Supreme Court to rally around the Chief Justice. True, the judiciary was on trial in this case, but in a different way. It was on trial insofar as its transparency, for example, was concerned. But I felt that it just became too personal a matter, and that the employees in many ways had no choice, because that's their boss and they have to follow.
Well, it was interesting because this is really my first full look at the Chief Justice, and his testimony showed me great insight. I mean, everything was either a personal attack or a personal plea. Is this well known about Renato Corona? Is this just a window that was open to the public? Do lawyers, the people he works with, is this well known about him?
In the first place, it's very difficult to get to know justices of the Supreme Court. They don't really go around in big circles. So I don't know much about Justice Corona as a person. So it's difficult for me to answer the question.
Okay, the last question I have is, you mentioned it is a political process. Many of the senators are re-electionists. We're moving forward. What role did politics play in this whole thing?
Oh, it played a big role, of course, especially coming at the time when you have elections in a year. But it's not a pure or a bare political decision, because they had to find a way to justify that decision in terms of the evidence presented.
Yes.
And the charges filed and the defenses raised by the parties. And all in all, I think that I'm satisfied with the result.
What does this now mean for the administration, for President Aquino?
Oh, I'm sure President Aquino is very happy with the result. And I hope that he will continue as far as his drive for improving the judiciary is concerned. And I hope that he will also be open to suggestions for speeding up the process and
Yes.
filling up the vacancies in the judiciary.
One of the specters that's constantly that was raised in the trial, was that it was the executive trying to co-opt power, weaken the justice system. Do you have any fears like this?
No, not really. Those were just really catering to the public opinion side of any trial. In any trial, you have the battle in court and you have the battle of public opinion. And to me, that was really just meant to sway public opinion.
And the public opinion now, how do you think this has been absorbed by the Filipino public?
But I think this is a very positive thing for the people, because it's one of the few times where you have an actual decision, you have accountability of an official who is one of the highest officials in the whole country. It's not often we have a case like this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chel. We've been speaking with Dean Jose Manuel Diokno from De La Salle University. We'll go back, show you some more scenes from the Senate before we talk to our reporters. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And other judgments by other Senate judges, they say that even if there's an exclusion in the Foreign Currency Deposit Act, Chief Justice Renato Corona should still have declared his wealth, even if there's an exclusion by the Senate law. Actually, the deciding vote was that of Senator Revilla. When it was already 15-3, he decided for the Chief Justice to be convicted, and then it became 16-3. But it also went actually up to 23. When Senate President Presiding Officer Juan Ponce Enrile says that Chief Justice Renato Corona should have interpreted these laws correctly, such as that the Article 11 or the proper conduct of public officers should be the superior law above the foreign currency deposit law. So that's why he should have declared his dollars in his statement of assets, liabilities, and disbursed. Meantime, Articles 3 and 7 will not be discussed since an article is already enough for the Chief Justice to be convicted. Now in the plenary hall, the people are still here for both panels, the prosecution and the defense. Many people some of them were congratulating each other, some of them were hugging each other, because after 44 days of trial, this is the day that it will end. On the other hand, it is very noticeable of the defense panel where they are very sad. You can see the sadness in their faces as well, as they were just noting decision after decision by the center judges in favor of the conviction of the chief.